This is the Catacombic Machine. I'm Joseph. Welcome to episode number 3, which will be about the election. Of course, how could it not? I asked my friend James, do you want to have a conversation and talk about what just happened? And he said sure, so we had a spontaneous talk that touched upon Malcolm X, how the evangelicals were voting and why, Trump and other things, of course. So I hope that you'll enjoy this. James is a good friend of the podcast. He's been with us since the beginning of the freestyle days, so I guess some of you will recognize his voice. He is a PhD student studying Malcolm X, among other things, so that's, I guess, why we brought up Malcolm. But I think that's a good perspective to have when you enter into a talk about what just happened. And, thinking about what just happened, people are shocked, people are disappointed, people are wondering why. And it's sort of been a week or so of disbelief. How could this happen? Personally, I wasn't surprised. I remember a few months ago when Hillary Clinton was standing and reading headlines from Breitbart, written by Milo Yiannopoulos, thinking that she were luring people over to her camp. Look at these Republicans, look at these right-wingers, the alt-right, look at them, how stupid they are. How can you even say such things? And at that moment, I became convinced that Donald Trump would be the next president of the United States, because Hillary so blatantly showed that all that preparation she has, all that experience she has for becoming president is not experience for being president today. It's for being president 10 years ago, maybe in the 90s. She's too old. She doesn't understand the world. She doesn't understand the internet. And I believe that is ultimately why she lost. And, for those of you who follow me on Twitter, you've perhaps seen that I've ranted against the sort of number of people, the metrics people who calculated where the votes were coming from. This very reductive way of looking at people where you are reduced to a vote. You are a likely person to vote with black skin, so we put you in the likely black voters camp. And how do we convince you? Well, we're sending Jay-Z and Beyonce your way. It's cynical, and ultimately I think that might have worked 4 years ago or 8 years ago, but evidently it didn't work this time. And even looking at the numbers, every single poll organization got everything wrong. I saw numbers saying 99.2% Hillary's winning the election. So, it's crazy how things worked out given how sure everyone was. And I tried to talk a little bit with James about this because it's been common just to say that Trump's this simple populist, and of course he is. But I think that Hillary is a populist too. I think the media has been populist too. Everyone's been using these very simplistic, reductive images of who people are. And because they've been using this method, this sort of number method that Obama used a few years ago, the sort of moneyball of politics, people don't buy it. Trump went out there and he said stupid things, and people were listening to him and they were thinking, I say stupid things too, it's just like me. He happens to have a lot of money and running for president, but I've also said bad things about women or whatever, so they could relate to him. Hillary became this robotic machine who just worked with numbers and finding a silver lining. I say this in the episode, in this whole mess, is that a lot of people simply refused to be part of it. And they said, fuck you, system, fuck you, Hillary, I'm not even voting. It's not that I'm going to support Trump, he's obviously crazy. but I'm sure not going to vote for you. I'm going to use the freedom of not voting as a protest against this corrupt system. Is that an explanation as good as any to why Hillary lost the election? I think so. Let me know what you think. You can email me at thecatacombicmachine@gmail.com. You can support the podcast on Patreon. And if you donate $3 per episode, you will be granted access to TCM Extra, which will be a new show. That said, let's talk to James.
Currently, I'm at Northwestern University. I'm in my first year of my PhD program in American religions, broadly speaking, looking at race, religion, and necropower, particularly looking at the political theology of Malcolm X.
When you're looking at the American election that just ended, is there something from what you're studying in school that gives you a unique perspective that you think that's important for other people to know about?
Oh, absolutely. Definitely in my own independent research concerning Malcolm, there's many things we can discuss. In fact, this week I've been drawing many comparisons between our current election and the 1964 election between LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, and Senator Barry Goldwater. Malcolm had very interesting takes regarding that election, takes that were not popular at the time. And as I'm looking at this current political moment, it definitely causes me to reflect on the words of Malcolm, particularly, Malcolm's critique of American liberal democracy, his transnational emphasis, placing the struggle of blacks within America within an international paradigm, his critique of American foreign policy. These things are still present with us today just as much as they were in 1964.
When we're looking at the time leading up to the election, I mean, it felt like forever, right? First with the primaries and then, of course, with the general election. And I think it's been quite of a unique experience, even, for people like myself in Sweden. We've been following this quite closely. And I guess everyone's a little shocked over the level of abuse in the campaigns. Is that something that you can look back to as well, or is this, as I'm saying, a unique experience?
No. I think it's safe to say it's a unique event, particularly regarding the rhetoric that was used, the fact that we've had, within the context of American liberal democracy, there has been several unsavory characters, but I think that Donald Trump is a unique figure, and this 2016 campaign is a unique campaign. So I definitely think that when you say there was shock over there, it's safe to say there was shock over here as well, for sure.
I think at the same time, he's expressing things that is deeply rooted in the American country, although it perhaps hasn't been so outspoken in a presidential campaign before. But maybe you can sort of contextualize Trump and say something about the views that he's talking about and how they are present in your experience of being a black man in America.
Yeah, well, definitely. I think the first thing I would say is, as someone who is a graduate of a conservative Christian Bible college in the southern part of the United States, the state of Texas, allow me first to say that nothing, and I say this, nothing Donald Trump said remotely surprised me. It was nothing that I've heard of. I haven't heard before, and I think that many people of color, whether they be black, whether they be of Latina origins, but particularly our brothers and sisters who are LGBTQIA, our trans brothers and sisters who have had any sort of encounters within evangelical structures of power, particularly evangelical higher learning institutions, Christian colleges, conservative seminaries, it would be hard to say that what Donald Trump said or the views that Donald Trump projected, we have not heard that before. Or I can't conceptualize how such a person can think such things regarding immigrants, can think such things regarding women, can pathologize the Black community in such a way. And I look back and say, well, in many ways, many people who have either attended these spaces of learning, who have attended these churches, I say, and I hope these statements, a lot of us have minor degrees in Trump studies, right? Because that's how a lot of our evangelical institutions, that's how they're oriented. So regarding the rhetoric, I would push back on those who say we haven't heard this, because first of all, who are we? They're not speaking to the Black population. They're not speaking about the LGBTQ population or all these other marginalized, otherized people groups. What I believe they're saying is we haven't heard someone say in such a vulgar way, the things we've been espousing for. There's no coincidence, brother, that Donald Trump received 81% of the evangelical vote. I've heard from some people 81%. I've heard from others 84%. So at least 80% of evangelicals in the United States of America voted for Donald Trump. So to then say that though 80% of evangelicals in America voted for Donald Trump, the seminaries and Bible colleges, that train such people, they teach something diametrically opposed to Trumpism. No. There's a reason why 84% of evangelical Americans voted for Trump. So as someone who came out of such spaces of learning and in such church spaces, nothing he said surprised me. So regarding the rhetoric, regarding the ideologies, as someone, who is well familiar with that language, someone who was trained, to speak in that language, I say it, I say jokingly, my first language in many ways is evangelical, right? Because that's the theological language that I was first introduced to, and a lot of that language reverberated throughout this campaign.
It's interesting, the parallel between Trump's political ideology and the evangelical faith. I do think, however, that, if you'd ask many of these 80% of the evangelicals who voted for Trump, they would say, well, what was important to me was the appointment of justices to the Supreme Court. We don't want abortion rights anymore. We think we should take that away. And, they would probably point to other things as well and say that's why we voted for him. And this racist stuff is not something that we support, but we can live with it.
Yeah, and I, to be honest, brother, I would. There's part of me that wants to push back on that.
Yeah, do.
Yeah, because I think that some people would like to use that, and I don't want to let evangelicals off the hook, because regarding the whole pro-life statement, mind you, the same people who say I want to get certain people on the Supreme Court because I'm an advocate for life, ask them where they stand on the death penalty. Ask them where they stand regarding the black site prisons that detain undocumented families throughout America. I'm from Texas, so I know about the for-profit detention centers where hundreds of immigrants have lost their life, hundreds of undocumented families have lost their lives. So when you hear the so-called logic of these voters saying, oh, well, I had to, vote. I felt like I had to vote for this particular candidate because, on the Supreme Court, I have to have someone who stands for life. I think that this, and this is a whole other conversation, but I'll just say that when people use those arguments, I think that those arguments are proxies for a whole different conversation, which I think is in many ways white supremacy's desire to control the body. And whatever language they have to use, be it the fetus be it the womb of a woman, be it whatever case, it's not about preserving life because, I think many of us know when you look at the programs that would cultivate life, that would sustain human flourishing, many of these same people, they can't speak about making daycare affordable. They can't speak about making sure that our elderly, are are able to have health care. They're not speaking about can poor people afford their insulin. So when it comes to actually cultivating life, actually being pro-life in a consistent manner, they become very agnostic, right? They become very agnostic when it comes to actually preserving life, like in the 10th month, the 11th month, the 3rd year, the 7th year, the 13th year, the 28th year. It's like we're gonna fight for you for 9 months until we actually have to see you, and once we see you, then may your fortune go with the gods. So I think those who like to use that position, in fact, if you want to go into history, that there's origins of the pro-life stance, and if you look at when the pro-life argument from the religious right began to ascend, you find some very interesting parallels. So I'll just say that those who like to say, "Oh no, we don't stand with Trump," when it comes to immigration, we don't stand with Trump for that rhetoric, but yet tell that to the people who will actually experience not only devastation, but those who will experience a loss of life because of the necropolitics of this administration. Not to say that necropolitics has not been a part of previous administrations, but whenever you say, I voted for this, so when that happens, I'm not responsible. No, you're responsible for all of it. You really are.
And I wouldn't dream of trying to defend the evangelicals here, but I do think that's sort of what the argument that they would put forth, because there are more reasons to vote for a candidate than simply the sort of populist rhetoric. People have a more deeply rooted opinions, but as you say, they might still be sort of an offshoot from white supremacy or whatever kind of oppressive way of living and thinking that we can talk about. But something that I was thinking about during the campaign, or when we were getting closer to the actual election, and they were touring around like crazy. I mean, Trump hit like 7 states a day the last week or something like that, and Clinton tried to sort of keep up. But what I thought about when I saw Clinton touring the country was that she, of course, had with her a few of her celebrity friends in order to convince people. And I mean, when she shows up in a predominantly black area with Jay-Z and Beyonce and want to convince people that she deserves their vote, I can't help but think that's a bit cynical from her point of view, and that, being reduced as a person to a quote unquote black vote or a Latino vote or a female vote or whatever might be one of the reasons she didn't win the election, because people didn't perhaps feel that she was there for them. She just had this plan for how to lure people to come over to her side. And eventually, it wasn't perhaps that all those people voted for Trump instead, but they didn't vote at all.
Well, yes. And I think that going forward, the Democratic National Convention, the Democratic Party as a whole, has a lot of soul searching to do. And that's been a present conversation in many spaces. You're exactly right. You can't say I have a lot of famous friends and I know famous people and that's why you should vote for me. Or you can't simply say vote for us because we're not the boogeyman or the boogeymen over there, right? And I think that a lot of reckoning is going to have to be done in the United States of America, and it's not just amongst conservatives. There's been a lot of condescension from the Democratic Party, spoken down to voters. One thing that many people, that was a present topic is the president, telling Americans, quote unquote, don't boo, vote, right? And that's very condescending. Because I can boo and vote, like I can chew bubblegum and walk at the same time. Like you don't. Fannie Lou Hamer was able to boo and vote. Medgar Evers was able to boo and vote. Martin King, if they weren't able to boo and vote, they booed while they tried to vote, right? So you can't tell the people to don't complain, just be a part of the democratic process. And I think that's sort of patronizing. It didn't win. It didn't win over any votes, right? So you can't browbeat people into freedom. You can't browbeat browbeat people into doing the right thing. And I think that this narrative that came from the Democratic National Convention, that came from the Democrats, is problematic as well. So whereas you have this Trump statement, Trump's main statement, we're going to make America great again, we can see how that's problematic for people of color and marginalized, otherwise peoples. America hasn't been great. We're trying to move towards something that all of us can live into in peace, and we're all trying to live into prosperity, but it hasn't been that way for many of us, and so we all can identify that. That's the low hanging fruit. We all can identify that, but we have to begin to look at what the Democrats were proffering up. This whole notion that we don't have to make America great again. America is already great. That's problematic, right? Because it's already great for who?
I heard someone say on CNN the other day that America is the greatest democracy on earth.
Yes.
And I just come on, man, don't you get it?
Yes.
Everyone's just laughing at you guys when you say things like that, because there is nothing. I mean, the democratic process in Sweden and our politicians, they're far from perfect.
Right.
But it's not as if we are looking over the Atlantic to America as this great example of how to do democracy.
Absolutely. American exceptionalism is the elephant in the room. Right. And I think that I think it was heralded, and it was a gospel proclaimed by both parties. And I think that when you have a nation of people who are reeling, right, it's not just the fact that Trump appealed to disaffected, to the disaffected white vote. No, it's the fact that, college students are swamped in debt. It's the fact that, even though we have 20 million people, under the who are being served under the Affordable Health Care Act, a lot of folks still can't afford medication. A lot of folks are still, we're losing our elders at a rapid rate because it's hard to live out here, right? And so when you look at it, people aren't living, it's hard to live, to work for a living wage, in these United States. So across the board, there are people, particularly when you deal with African Americans who, have watched multiple people either not face a trial for killing unarmed Black citizens, or cops who have faced trial get cleared of all charges. Like I said, we're still, we've deported more families under this current administration than any other administration. So across the board, there are people who were deeply reeling, right, and people who don't share this doctrine of American exceptionalism. So the Democrats thought that we can preach the same gospel, we can repackage the same gifts, and we can get some young celebrities out there, and that's how we get them going. And I hope that from this crushing defeat, because that's what it was. It was a crushing defeat. It was an embarrassing defeat, because states that the Democrats are used to carrying went red. And so you can't. So it's one thing to say, oh well, it's because of this or it's because of that. It's because your strategy was poor.
Yeah, I mean, she was outsmarted.
Yeah.
Listening now, you hear people saying, she's winning the popular vote and so on, and therefore she should be the president. Well, if it was about the popular vote, the campaigns would have looked very, very different. In the end, I can't say, that I think that Clinton would have been a great president either, because there's other problems than just the sort of national politics, because you can say, okay, so look at the situation for LGBTQ people in America. It would have been better with Clinton. For a child in Yemen, perhaps not, right?
Amen. No, and I think that goes back to the statement I made earlier regarding Malcolm X. And as someone who studies Malcolm and Malcolm's commitment to transnational solidarity, his commitment and emphasis on internationalism, that's a topic that's missing in these conversations because, and I will say this, many of my colleagues who I respect immensely, who are of the liberation tradition, I'm speaking of, particularly liberation theology, Black liberation theology, other forms of liberation theologies, many of them sound like American exceptionalists as they're grieving this electoral process, because in their analysis, you only hear how this particular candidate would have helped Americans. But in their analysis, they never talk about Abu Ghraib. They never talk about Guantanamo Bay. They never talk about Benghazi or Yemen. They don't talk about Honduras. They don't talk about Colombia. And so the same people who in other spaces, in their classrooms, in their churches, they would talk about in Christian terms, the priesthood of all believers, in Islamic terms, the Ummah, the transnational solidarity, the transcommunal solidarity of all believers. When it comes to election season, the flesh of Colombian babies matters less than the flesh of babies in Cleveland, the flesh of babies in Honduras, the flesh of children in Yemen, the expanded drone warfare that is happening against international law throughout many regions of the world. None of that really matters. And I'm not talking about to the Republican Party. I'm not even talking about to the Democratic Party. I'm talking about liberation theologians.
Yeah.
Don't want to talk about Guantanamo Bay. I'm talking about liberation theologians don't want to talk about Honduras. Liberation theologians are talking about what we need to consider when talking about the death squads, in Central America, death squads that were trained in the U.S., in the School of Americas. The two people, and this is going back to 1980, but the point still stands. The two of the men who were part of the assassination ploy against Archbishop Monsignor Romero. Two of those brothers were trained in the School of Americas in the United States, right? So when we're talking about preserving life and being a champion for life, it's very interesting, and I'll just leave it there. It's very interesting how these people who are about liberation and emancipation, they don't want to talk about Abu Ghraib. They don't want to talk about Guantanamo Bay. They don't want to talk about the torture memos that were established in the United States, where U.S. Administrators, high-ranking officials worked alongside judges to find ways to rationalize torture and find ways to legitimize torture in ways that would clear those who were doing the torturing, to clear the administrations that were signing off on torture practices. Our government, the United States government, found ways to use the law, and I would argue it's been this way for liberal democracies and the liberal state. The law is not used to defend people against violence. No, the law is used to legitimate violence, right? So if you're legitimating violence and using the law to legitimate violence, then you will always find a way to support the necropolitical agendas of the imperial nation state, right? So my point is, the same people who across the board would say the assassination of Archbishop Monsignor Romero was a travesty, the same people who would then say the assassination here in the U.S. of Dr. King was a travesty, the same people who would say the assassination of Medgar Evers was a travesty, they don't have a conceptual framework, and many of them do not desire to have a conceptual framework of the countless and nameless people who were killed in black site prisons, whose names we will never know, whose names were expunged from all documents and all government records, who were thrown into black pits, thrown into unmarked graves. That should be a theological issue. So we should lift that up. So when we talk about the blood crying out from the ground here in the States, we always talk about because we definitely don't talk about Malcolm's blood, because we don't want to know what Malcolm's blood is saying from the ground. We talk about young Martin's blood. We don't want to talk about older Martin, but we talk about young Martin's blood, and we talk about Medgar's blood. But we never talk about Arab blood. We never talk about blood from Guantanamo. We don't talk about blood from Abu Ghraib. We don't talk about blood from the black site prisons here in the U.S.
Yeah.
Those blood, that blood is not allowed to speak. So my desire is that as we're mourning, as we're grieving, as we're reflecting, as we're talking about how problematic the current or the soon-to-be administration will be, let's not forget what our elders taught us. I'm speaking now out of the black tradition. I'm speaking now out of the black radical tradition. That there's a reason why Malcolm wasn't saying all the way for LBJ, because Malcolm knew what was going on in the Congo in 1964. Malcolm knew what was going on in Vietnam in 1964. Malcolm knew what was going on with the Aborigines in Australia in 1964. Malcolm knew what was happening with black bodies in Brazil in 1964, and he knew how the United States government was connected to all these actions, or in some way tied to or in some way supporting many of these necropolitical actions around the world. So his transnational solidarity and his transnational commitments would not allow him to be the chaplain for imperial power. And I would just ask many of my liberation brothers and sisters to allow Malcolm's witness to speak as we think about ways to move forward in this current political moment.
By excluding all these different stories that we can actually listen to, we open up to much more easily confuse our simplistic understanding about the world with the world itself. And I think that sort of confusion might actually be the reason why people are so shocked that Trump happened to win this election.
That's true. So under this current administration, or like I said, soon to be administration, we have dangerous days ahead, difficult days ahead. I'm worried about the environment, like many are, and different things. But it does need to be said. And I don't know if you're familiar with it in Sweden, but the issue of Standing Rock in North Dakota, the indigenous community here. So the Standing Rock, neither party said anything of any worth or any value regarding Standing Rock. So as we, once again, even though...
Isn't Obama saying, let's go ahead with it?
It was in the news that could be happening. But, in regards to the current administration, regarding to both candidates, no one said anything substantially. I think besides Brother Bernie, no one said anything substantially in favor of the indigenous community there at Standing Rock. So I would just caution us from making one particular candidate the great white hope, because when you look at words that were said, not just words that were said in the past, but words that were said in the present political moment, particularly when it comes to communities that are struggling and suffering most, it wasn't a message of liberation for all people, but about promising to further manage these other groups, right? So we didn't hear from either candidate about, we didn't hear from any candidate how we're going to protect Muslims and how our Muslim brothers and sisters are not just vital members of society, but we must denounce all rhetoric that would seek to otherize them. Even though we could say, oh, this one candidate spoke on behalf of Muslims, and this one candidate, said that that they were for denouncing all violent rhetoric. But yet that same candidate said that this is what we need for the quote unquote good Muslims to do. And I would love for this candidate to describe and break down what is a good Muslim and what's a bad Muslim. Malcolm X in 1964 was not a good Muslim. And Malcolm X was not a terrorist. Malcolm X had never killed anyone. Malcolm X was not plotting, anyone's physical death. But yet, I would go so far as to say every Western government, in the world considered Malcolm X, El-Hajj Malik Shabazz, to be a bad Muslim. Right. So when you're lifting up this language in 2016 of the bad Muslims, and this is what we need the good Muslims to do. We need the good Muslims to point out the bad Muslims. Like, that's not something that you can just say, oh, well, it's a slip of the tongue. No, that's a very, clear and direct statement on how this particular candidate and how both candidates are viewing the other. Right. Because in the same way, we didn't hear any candidate talk about this is what we need the good white Christians to do. Even though when you look at it, Dylan Roof, a white boy, went into Mother Emanuel and shot up and killed the church. But yet neither candidate felt compelled on the national stage to admonish white Christians on what they need to do. White Christians never need to do anything, right? And I think that's why it's important also in this historical moment for otherized communities to take rest in the fact that God hasn't called us to the lost sheep of white America. And when it comes to what white America needs to do, all right, that's a conversation they need to have amongst themselves. But based on the rhetoric that has gone out from these officials, from these elected officials, from these candidates, I think it's safe to say, as people of color, we have many conversations that need to be had, and many conversations that we will have. But one conversation I can say at least I won't be having, and one conversation I'm not interested in having, is how I can reach the lost sheep of white America. That's not my project.
So, the election happened and Trump is going to be the president.
Yes, sir.
And that's just my immediate thought was just Nietzsche's amor fati. We need to accept fate. We can't really just live in a pretend world where Trump isn't president. So looking for a silver lining in this, it's very difficult, I think. But one thought that popped into my mind was at least that, people's refusal to actually be belittled by the politicians, as I said, by their identity. So you're a black person, you should vote for Hillary. This refusal by people to be reduced in this way so that they didn't even go out to vote. Perhaps that strength it takes to affirm that none of these candidates is good enough to deserve my vote. Maybe that energy can at least be used now to resist what is coming, but also hopefully, I think, to create new visions for what the world might look like.
No, absolutely. And I think one thing that I hope that the Democratic Party learns from this is that don't lay it up when you should dunk it. Right. And I think I use that basketball analogy. Oftentimes, when you think you have a breakaway and an easy road to the basket, many people or many players are tempted to lay the ball up, just do a simple layup. And that's how you get your shot swatted. That's how you get it blocked. If you can dunk it. Right. And I think that, one thing that we'll look back on is that the Democratic Party laid it up when they should have slammed that thing in. And I think looking forward to your point, I think you're absolutely right. We can afford no more layups. The Democratic Party can afford no more layups. We as a community, all otherized communities, can afford no more layups. And I think that this is what many people have been arguing and petitioning for a while, whether it be, a third party, whether it be really and truly challenging the establishment within the current iteration of the Democratic Party. This sort of establishment politics, there's both for us because we're not them. And that we're not rooted in these communities of struggle, and that we're going to just we're just going to repackage the same voices for the last 30 years, and hey, y'all will take it because at least we're not the other side, or we're going to put forth the same, the same talking points, and we're going to, roll out the same, big galas and big big concerts, and we're going to go to as many fundraisers as rallies, or we're going to go to less rallies than fundraisers. That doesn't work, and it's not going to work, right? So my hope, and it is an active hope, is that we as a people will mobilize, that those of us who have certain gifts will use our gifts, whether it be the gift of writing, the gift of mobilization, the gift of whatever that gift may be, right? That we would use these gifts to mobilize, to agitate, to demand not just from the soon-to-be administration, but demand from the Democratic Party our voices to be heard. Because, once again, I'll go to what I said earlier. There was a lot of condescension from the Democratic Party in this particular electoral cycle. One thing I have to say about the other party regarding their base, it was, I hear you, I understand you, right? Even though I fundamentally disagree with what that base is saying, it was I hear you, I understand you. There is a lot of things wrong with this nation, right? I disagree once again with their final analysis or their analyses, but the fact that they spoke to the pain of their base, whereas you have on the other side, shut up, stop complaining, get out there and do something. Like, that doesn't really work, right? And we can say that works in parenting, but I doubt that works with parenting. It may work when the child is 5. But when that child is 16 and 17, there comes a point when you're going to have to at least reason, and you're going to have to hear someone out. And you can use the whole, shut up and do as I say, I brought you in this world, I'll take you out. That may be good when you're someone's biological parent, but when you're someone when you're someone running for office, you can't use the whole, I brought you in this world, I'll take you out. If you want to honor me, this is what you're going to do. This is what you're not going to do. And this is what you got. people aren't trying to hear that. You have to speak to real pain. You have to speak to real fears. You have to speak to real concerns. When organizers are agitating, you can't browbeat them. You can't ostracize them. You can't seek to manage them, as the Democratic National Convention did with the Black Lives Matter movement. And one of the leaked memos that came out that said, when you see a Black Lives Matter activist, don't promise them any legislation. Don't make any promises. This is how you manage them. And even though that was the one piece of the one memo that was leaked, trust me, that's how establishment politics works for all other rights groups. If you don't have money and you're not a lobbyist, they're going to manage you. And for us as people at the base, we have to come to a point where we're sick and tired, as our beloved ancestor Fannie Lou Hamer said, we're sick and tired of being sick and tired. We're sick and tired of being managed. We're sick and tired of taking whatever you give us. I mean, look at this. One thing I noticed, and I'll say this, one thing I noticed about the convention, about the election, election night, they kept emphasizing the black vote. They kept emphasizing the Latina vote. Why did they kept emphasizing this regarding the Democratic Party? Because without these votes, there is no Democratic Party.
Yeah, and what you said, I mean, Zizek went out before the election and said he'd vote for Trump because he thinks this might catapult sort of a revolution in American politics. And I people gave him a lot of shit for that. But at the same time, now I think people hope that he is right, that there will be enough energy to sort of mobilize a movement that will radically transform the Democratic Party. But it's still going to be 4 years of Trump at least. And anyway, you talked a little bit about Black Lives Matter. So what's happening with Black Lives Matter in this situation post-election?
Oh, I mean, from what I see, from what I know and what I've read regarding Black Lives Matter, the particular organization and the broader movement for Black Lives, I've been very inspired. No one's stopping. In fact, from what I've read and from what I know from various comrades in the struggle and colleagues in the struggle, it's only intensified efforts. So in many ways, the base is being rallied. Actions are still going out. We're still going to demand, that our issues are heard, not only heard, but that our agenda is taken seriously. Our agenda is then implemented into substantive change in our society. And so one thing I can say is that this has not deterred anyone. And in fact, regarding the movement for Black Lives, one thing I can say about my tradition, I love my tradition, I love my people, is from our tradition that we get the words, hey, we're not going to let anything or anybody turn us around. And in fact, the words exactly are, we ain't gonna let nobody turn us around. And, and back in the day, the song was, we ain't gonna let no jailer, we ain't gonna let segregation, we ain't gonna let Jim Crow turn us around. In the year 2016, we can just remix it and say, we ain't gonna let no administration turn us around. We ain't gonna let no appointees turn us around. We ain't gonna let no electoral college turn us around. We ain't gonna let no Supreme Court justice turn us around. And I think that same spirit that visited the elders is visiting us in this present historical moment. So I'm proud to be Black in this historical moment. I'm proud to struggle alongside my people. And like my elders said, I will say that this is my granddaddy's movement. This is my grandmama's movement. There are some distinctions, but one thing I do, one place of divergence, one point of divergence, should I say, for me, is some people are saying this ain't our granddaddy's movement. This ain't our grandmama's movement. We only have the spirit that we have because of our granddaddies, because of our grandmamas. So I proudly say that this is our movement, our shared movement. So I'll link hands not only with my brothers and sisters who are my contemporaries and my peers, but I'll link hands with my grandmothers, with our grandfathers, my great grandmothers and grandfathers, our ancestors who look on and who join us and whose spirit invigorates us. This is all of our movement. And together, the ancestors and those of us who are rallying today for freedom and justice, we sing together in unison. We ain't gonna let nothing and nobody turn us around. So I'm hopeful right now, and I would just encourage anybody else out there to keep that hope active, to keep that hope, in the words of our dear brother Jesse, keep that hope alive, right? Because there's difficult days ahead, but there's also glorious days ahead for those of us who don't lose the faith. And so, yeah, I'm glad to be Black, and I'm glad to stand in solidarity with BLM and the broader movement for Black lives and what they're trying to do in our country.
What you're saying is important, because my perception, at least, has been not only about Black Lives Matter, but about many social justice movements, has been that they have sort of accepted the reductive categorization from the powers, and that there's been, in the Nietzschean sense, a kind of slave morality where the powers are evil because they are the ones in power and we are the good ones. I think when you talk about sort of the emphasis on communication, of having important discussions, of talking about vision, about what one wants to accomplish, and that one doesn't allow for the, as I said, the reductive categorizations to be the limits for what our group can be, whatever group one belongs to. So I feel sort of encouraged by what you're saying, and I hope that there will be political energy that can transform these administrations from below, because that's, I think, how democracy must function.
I would say I do feel hopeful for the future, not because of the future in and of itself, but I feel hopeful because I feel hopeful in the sisters and brothers that I live in community with. I feel hopeful because of people who I talk to on a daily basis, brothers who are not in the academy, brothers who are truly the truest definition of freedom fighters, brothers who knock on doors, brothers who I have a brother who I was speaking to earlier today, and he said, I have to let you go, brother, because I'm working the food pantry. I'm hopeful because of people like him, who don't cower, who refuse to go gently into that good night, but brothers who do face tomorrow and face it with the spirit of service, and sisters who have carried this movement and continue to carry this movement and continue to be the leaders of this present moment. And so I'm hopeful, not because because in and of myself, I have the strength, because you can ask my wife, you can ask my comrades. My strength fails me on a daily, but when I look at the people who are truly fighting for a better world, the people who have refused to let hate have the final say, the people who love us into life, brother, when I look at that and I see the life happening all around me, I can't help but have faith. And also my faith tradition, right? My faith in God, my faith in God's people of all faith persuasions, people who have no particular faith persuasion, but my personal convictions regarding a power that is beyond my own, a strength that is beyond my own, and a concept of justice that wasn't given by any particular administration. And I'll just close with these words by my beloved great grandmother, who is no longer physically with us. She would say to me as a child, this joy that I have, honey, the world didn't give it, and the world can't take it away. And I would look at her, befuddled as a child, like, what is this joy that you're speaking about? My great grandmother lived in this tiny home on the south side of Temple, Texas. She never had much money. She worked at a cafe all of her life up into her late 60s. She worked at this cafe, but she would always, every Sunday, sing loud in her Baptist choir, Macedonia Baptist Church. She would say, "This joy that I have, this world didn't give it, and this world can't take it away." And I'm 28 years old right now, and with a smile on my face, I can tell great Granny Medea, I understand what you meant, because despite what the political climate tells me, despite what the newspapers tell me, despite sometimes what my own emotions tell me, there's a faith that I have in humanity. There's a faith that I have in my brothers and sisters. There's a faith ultimately I have and the cause of justice and freedom that no administration gave to me. That there's a joy that I have that I can't sign for on a ballot, or I can't endorse on a ballot. There's a joy that I have that I can't renew at my at the DMV. But there's a joy that I have that surpasses all understanding. And because No administration gave it to me. This present administration didn't give it to me, nor can this future administration give it to me. This joy that I have, because no one gave it to me, no one can take it away. And I would just want to leave that word of encouragement to anybody out there who's listening, right? And that's not a quotidian statement. At least I hope it's not. It's not intended to be. But there's a real joy you have. It may not be in yourself, but it's in the work around you. And when you can't lean on yourself, and then trust me, I'm saying this to myself, that there's going to be many moments in this current political iteration that we're entering into. There's going to be many moments where I myself am not going to have the strength to go on. But I know that there are people around me who will lift me up, and my reasonable service to them is that I can do the same for them. So take heart in one another, whether we're talking about the U.S., Sweden, or anywhere in between, right? We need to lean on each other and lean into that joy that these present administrations didn't give us. Because trust me, brother, they want us to believe that they are the authors and finishers of that joy, and we must look back at them with the spirit, the spirit of our ancestors, and say, no, you didn't give me this joy, and I'll be damned if you take it away.
And I think that's a great way to end this, because it's sort of in the spirit of what we've talked about all the time. You are more than simply a black vote. You have that joy, and there's obviously much more. And, I think that is something worth emphasizing, not only in relation to the administrations or the president, but also in people's relationships with other people, because there is obviously some tensions going on between various groups that voted for different candidates, and I think that's something that needs to be addressed, and doing it in that way, that's a perfect way to end this conversation. Thank you so much, James, for being on the show again, and we'll talk again sometime.
All right, brother, it's always an honor. Peace to you and peace to all of our listeners.
All right, I hope that you guys enjoyed that. James is an interesting thinker, and he has an unmistakable passion for other people. I think that went through into your ears as well, because I can feel it when I talk to him, and I'm very grateful that I can be in conversation with him. And with you, of course. You can email me at thecatacombicmachine@gmail.com, and of course through Twitter and Facebook and so on. And I hope that I got my point through in this episode, because I didn't plan for it that much, but it sort of came out that I find it deeply problematic. Of course, it's problematic when Trump reduces people down to a skin color or a religion or a gender or whatever, and abuse it or say bad things about it, or make these blunt statements about where he touches women or how Muslims are, essentially, or whatever. However, I think it is problematic when Clinton does the similar thing, because she reduces people down to their skin color and says this is a black vote, this is a Latino vote, this is a Latina vote, whatever kind of vote, because ultimately they're just tools to catapult her into power. And she lost, probably, or possibly, at least, because of that. And I'm not sure, how the future will be, but I keep being optimistic, I think we have to assume responsibility. If this election has shown us anything, it's that these politicians, they will not fix anything for us. We'll have to do it by ourselves. So, keep talking to each other and have fun while you're doing it. This is the Catacombic Machine, and I'll be back as soon as I can. I just had a kid, that's why I've been away for a while, but we're home now. Both mom and the kid are doing fine, so I'm happy about that, but it's time consuming. I'll do my best to be back as soon as possible. And lastly, go to patreon.com/thecatacombicmachine and support me if you like to. As soon as I can, I will also start up this other show, TCM Extra, only for Patreons. Alright, that's everything for today. Have a great weekend, or whenever you're listening to this. Bye.